I'll make that motion.
Frazier? We have a second.
Take me off of mute, right?
You make him a second, Mr. McGowan?
I'll make a second, thank you.
All right, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, action agenda, new business terms. Kevin, you have anything to bring up?
No resolutions under new business or action agenda items. If you want to go right into the discussion items, we can move into that.
Yep. Shortfall, yes.
Yes. So, as most of you are aware, with the pandemic this last year, I actually have a sheet in front of me. It's not even all the events. On this sheet alone, I had 11 events for the Charles R. Wood Park this year. But this doesn't even include Americade and a couple other ones that are normally on here. Of those 11 events, we only were able to, and I didn't have this the other day when it was asked in a board meeting, but we only were able to do 3 events. Something happened back in January, which was part of the Lake George Winter Carnival. We are having the holiday lights, which I believe starts this weekend. And then we had the Lake George Music Festival. Those are the only events that actually took place this year of the 11 that I have on my sheet. Again, minusing some of the other ones like Americade that's not on my sheet. The bottom line is the way that we do the budget for the Charles R. Wood Park is all the expenses to the park basically should be covered from all the revenues in the park. But with this year and the pandemic happening and the cancellation of a lot of events, we are short on funding. The upkeep of the turf, the power in the buildings, the security that we pay through Verizon or New York Fire and Security, all those items are still going on. They don't necessarily get turned off. The turf was probably a big part of that. Was we spent a lot of money on that turf to maintain that turf. So those are things that we still need to upkeep during the year. The village has attendants that mow the lawn, maintain the turf, monitor the sprinkler systems, monitoring garbage removal if need be. And they typically have, which you see that I bring most of the time to Park O&M meetings, every month. They have some type of cost associated with them doing that work. The bottom line is, I kind of went through the numbers the other day, and we average in expenses on a normal given year about, give or take, about $58,000 a year, give or take. And then the revenue, of course, we usually have enough to cover that. Last year, we said that any more revenue that would come in, it would stays in deferred revenue, so they could be used for other items that may come up, such as some of the work on the south parcel, or they were looking to do a kiosk. They could use that extra money that was left over, and that was part of the initial agreement. The fact of the matter is, this year, without having those events, we still had a lot of expenses. Not $60,000 worth, but at least $40,000 worth of expenses this year. With that being said, we are right now in a shortfall of about $15,000, maybe a little bit closer to $16,000 just in expenses alone. One of the things, though, that I recognized this morning was that we did take in funding from a couple other events like the Adirondack Festival, Wine and Food Festival, that would be carried into next year, that were put into the deferred revenue that may have covered some of the expenses for this year. But they requested that we hold their money, into next year. So the shortfall may be closer, as opposed to the $16,000 to almost $23,000 for this year. Reason being, coming that shortfall is again, we didn't have a lot of the events that took place this year, and $20,000 worth of the shortfall this year was carried over from last year. So I'm asking at committee, and again, I talked with County Administrator Moore, and I believe we discussed that maybe there was a possibility that if we were okay with some of the sales tax that came in, would we take some of this money out of contingency to cover the costs associated with what we're down, so that I can start next year on a clean slate without having to carry this over again into another year and then still coming up the following year short. Again, I attribute most of the shortage to we did not have the events this year, and that hurt us. But you still have things to do on the park, you know, on a monthly basis. So I guess what I would be seeking is possibility of requesting maybe contingency covering the overage for this year, put it on an even slate, and then, you know, I don't want to say tighten up the belts last year. I just maybe even eliminate more. But again, you know, some of those expenses that are associated with the turf, we don't want to forego those expenses, because the fact of the matter is, if we lose that turf, it'll be I'm going to say a nightmare to try to get that turf back to in the shape that we keep it in.
Yes, Mr. Moore.
Kevin, if I could just clarify, you mentioned the deferred revenue. That in those cases where we have deferred revenue, we will. The idea is that they're going to pay once. It's going to be counted next year when they hopefully have the event, as opposed to this year. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, Ryan. I didn't catch all of it. Could you say that one more time?
Sure. When in cases where we have deferred revenue, I believe the idea of that is hopefully their event takes place next year, so that revenue will apply to costs for next year rather than this year. Is that right?
That is correct, but it doesn't necessarily, and I verified this with Deputy Treasurer Lynch this morning, is that money was just put into deferred revenue. So it probably, since it was in deferred revenue, it was being used to cover expenses for this year. But in reality, we would need it for next year's events.
Right. What about, have you factored in any revenue from the Holiday Light show that we have scheduled to go for 11 days?
We did factor that in. We did factor that in for my final kind of invoices for this year. And I mean, I could go through, you know, give or take what they are, but I mean, they're the typical ones you're going to have every year. We have water taxes for the sprinkler systems. It's $3,400. We have the hauling of the material for the 4 bays over on the south parcel, which was paid to the town of Lake George for $1,000. We have the July, August, and September attendant, which averaged $1,600, $1,300, and $1,700 for each one of those. Turf management was minimal. They did very little at the end of the year for fertilizer. They were expected to do, $15,000 more, which was kind of plugging the turf, which we do every year. But since we didn't have a lot of the events this year, we canceled doing those. We have another $1,000 for looks like for October attendance. We have $565 or $560, which was to cover the cost of everything associated with the Holiday Light event going on right now. We have another big one is, again, the deferred revenue also covers the cost of anything that happens on the south parcel. This happens to be one of those years where we budget every year for about $20,000 a year on the south parcel to do, whether it be cleaning up the ponds, removing cattails, a lot of that testing that they do over there. All those costs are supposed to be deferred or be covered by the deferred revenue that we take in. This happened to have been a year that a lot of those, they don't do every $20,000 worth every year. It may be 10, it may be 12, it may be 8. This happens to be a year that they did a lot of those items. So we have still a $3,000 invoice for them, for theirs as well. So the bottom line, I think all expenses this year would have been about $40,000, where again, I said normally on an event year, it's upward of $60,000. And again, you take $20,000 off of that for what was carried over from last year. It makes it even less. But the money needed at this point, I have about $5,900 left in the deferred revenue with $21,000 worth of invoices. So it's about $15,500. But again, that doesn't cover the cost of the money that was used that was used this year, which would be for next year's event. So that would be another $8,000 on top of that 15,500, which would be about 22,525.
A question, Gene?
Yes, Dennis, I'm sorry.
Oh, thank you. Kevin, what'd you put down for income from the Light Festival? What's
Well, originally that was $5,500 because it was 11 days, and I believe it was the $500 a day. But that was since reduced from the board meeting. So I'm not even, and I didn't even ask Betsy, and I'm just you saying that she had already done this last week, probably before the board meeting. So it may be even a little bit more. I can run the numbers real quick, or I can ask her real quick. But that it might be even shorter.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. McGowan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, on the light show coming up, I believe we reduced it down pretty much to cover our costs to clean the bathrooms and do everything else that we have to do up there. I guess the question I want to raise is that, it's something that we didn't think about back when we agreed to give some of these events that were canceled money from the OC tax, and not thinking ahead that we're carrying expenses where we were offsetting these costs. So, and not knowing, learning how everything has been set aside for the OC tax and that, is that something that is maybe in our laws or something we could put into our law? This is circumstances, we never knew this was going to happen at the time, but since we had to cancel all those events and we gave a lot of events money from the OC tax to cover their costs for canceling, is there a possibility to be able to grab some of the money for the OC tax to cover some of these costs legally? Anyone? Dennis? Hello?
I dozed off during the middle of your diatribe. I don't know the answer to your question. There's OCTAX there. It can be funded almost for anything. Brad, the decisions you have to make is you need to take what money you have and prioritize it, and then go down that list till you get to whatever it is you want to fund, decide whether or not you want to do it.
Well, due to the circumstances that we've had this year, and like I said, a lot of events most of the events didn't happen. We did hand out some money, and I know we've held back on the some supplemental, from the OC tax. Is this a good way to help the county stay whole with their expenses, where we would have been generating income if we could offset it through some of the like the supplemental money that we've held back, and I'm not trying to start a war here or anything, but I mean,
It's already raging.
Hit the mute button.
Yeah. No, well, it's conceivable, Brad, but we need to look at it in the big picture. What was your shortfall again, Kevin?
For a total of about $23,000.
Wow. What, the parking fees you get, that goes in that fund, right?
Well, no, not necessarily. The parking fees that come for the normal meters being used day in and day out are not part of this fund. What goes into this fund are the parking meters associated with events.
and didn't we give some of that parking meter back to Lake George to help offset their sewer project?
That was for the Beach Road parking lot.
All right.
Correct.
Well, these are some of the things I believe we should have thought about when, you know, and I'm not pointing the finger, and like I said, I'm not trying to start a war, but who would have thought that, oh my gosh, we're going to have this shortfall here because, I mean, so much has happened and everybody's been going in different directions, but it really has to raise the questions that we knew the expense coming now. How do we find that money?
The only comment I'll make as chairman is that I think starting January 1st, whoever the new chairman is, one way or the other, we should come up with a new plan for this festival space to protect things from like this happening. And also, we got to be set forth in what we're going to charge. If we charge an event X amount of dollars, another event, they all should pay the same. You know, coming back and saying, let's give somebody a little break because they're this, they're a not-for-profit, or that kind of stuff. It's going to catch up to, and it has caught up to us now. So, I mean, I just think this is a tough situation. We do have bills that we have to pay, where the money's coming from, contingency maybe, or sales tax revenue. Our tax is kind of tapped out. We're just barely going to make enough for what we have to pay coming up for events. And these event coordinators are going to be asking, I know, for more money to get their events. So we got to, first thing in January, come up with a plan. And you know, we can't give everybody what they want. And if they can't do an event for, you know, a reasonable amount, maybe we shouldn't take it this year until we catch up a little. That's only my suggestion. And that's all I can really comment on. I think, Rachel, you had your hand up?
I did. Thank you, Chairman Merlino. I wanted to weigh in because I wasn't able to make your meeting last month. And Mayor Blades, I wanted to apologize off the floor on last Friday, our board meeting. We talked a little bit about the light show that's starting at the end of this week. And I know, you know, it sounds like a great event. And I agree with Chairman Merlino that there needs to be more discussion around the fees for the festival space. And if, you know, legally we're able to look at different types of fee structures. But just to clarify what Brad was asking, and Brad, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the confusion came from not being able to use OCTAX money to pay the rental fee at the Festival Commons. I know so many times what goes on in OCTAX carries over into this committee, and I apologize to Chairman Merlino that I don't have all those ducks in a row and talking with you about the O&M, you know, the festival space of it, the OCTAX piece of it, the tourism piece of it. If it's confusing for us, it's confusing for the public. So definitely seems like something we can work on. But Chair or Administrator Moore, is that something you can just address briefly with what your concerns were with being able to cover the costs for that?
For that particular event?
Well, for using occupancy tax for, you know, we get a lot of questions about using OCTAX. And I spoke with an event organizer just yesterday and trying to explain that OCTAX, and correct me if I'm wrong, based on your emails, my understanding is OCTAX funds are not applicable to be paid for Festival Common rental space.
Well, the point we were making, well, number one, we're out of OCTAX funds for this year in terms of this year's budget. And number two, the point that I was trying to make in that exchange is we should not be using the OCTAX to simply move money over into the general fund. This is a general fund revenue to cover general fund expenses. And the way that particular event had been laid out publicly was that all the expenses were already covered, and that included the expense on the rental. So to then come back less than a week later and say we're requesting occupancy tax funds to cover the rental, what that amounts to is saying dollar for dollar we're going to take money out of the occupancy tax fund to put it in to pay ourselves in the general fund. So there is a sensitivity about using occupancy tax dollars to promote tourism, and that's what I was addressing.
Are still not giving us an answer of what we're going to do.
Well, my recommendation would be to use contingency. That's what we
that's what I was looking for. Yes.
Yeah.
And I would like to just use contingency, and hopefully, I don't know if it's legal or what, but this time next year, if we happen to be more than even, if all goes well for the summer and the events and we're back to making money again and everybody's happy, maybe put some of it back in the contingency that we took out.
I have a question. Will
Mr. Garrity.
we be starting 2021 with zero balance in expenses, Kevin?
Yes, we will. I mean, I'll give you what that final number is. I want to verify these numbers. I know Betsy has done them all for me here. I want to verify them with the treasurer's office. So I don't have the exact number here necessarily in front of me. As I said, it's 15.5 and change for the rest of the invoices, and then whatever we would have for events next year that have been carried over to money, which I think makes it about 23.5. But I will provide you the exact number so that we do start January 1st with a zero balance of expenses.
The only thing I would say to this whole thing is, we need to watch what we're doing there. And I thought the whole idea was that to be self-sustaining, but it's not being self-sustaining. Whether you had the events or not, I mean, you still had the expenses for the property. So we should get a good handle on what our expenses are, our known expenses, excluding what you pay for bathroom attendants and stuff like that when you have events. But we really have to get a handle on how much it's going to cost us a year, the best you can, on the actual expenses of operating Wood Park for the turf, electricity, and that. And then the other side of the road where we have to do the environmental stuff. So that's what I would suggest. But Tammy, how much do we have in? 120. Okay, we still will be okay. But I just think that we really got to start managing that a lot better. You can't come here after the cat's out or the horses out.
Well, that's what my little speech a few minutes ago. We have to come up with a plan and we got to stick to it. And I know these events bring in a lot of sales tax revenue, tax revenue, keep businesses working. But these events, they do put out a lot of money, but they have to take a chance on some of we can't be giving it back to them because they spent it in January, February, and March to promote an event in August. They have to understand that if things are not right, it's hard. This year we were very lenient and we tried to help everybody that did spend money give back some, and that's why we're in the position we're in now. So I think come the first of the year, we really have to revamp this whole project. That's my own personal feeling.
Yeah, no, I will say more.
Yeah, and in terms, I just wanted to add that in terms of the philosophy of this, that the events that are hosted there help pay for the costs. It was not for lack of trying. I mean, Mayor Blaze can attest that we had a lot of events that we really tried hard to pull off this year that for various reasons, either because the state didn't allow it or because the event organizers, like with the concert series, the drive-in concert series, just didn't think that they could make it work within the confines of the rules that the state set. So we had a lot of events that we put a lot of time and effort into making happen that ultimately didn't happen. So it was just an odd year.
Right, but I also heard Kevin say, that we deferred some expense to the property, that we got to be careful not to defer it. We lose the property. And so I think we need to get a better handle on what it costs to have that property. So we know going into the end of the year. And look, this is not happening in 100 years, and let's hope it doesn't happen in another 100 years.
All right, so can we move on to get a motion to take, when Kevin gives us the final figure, roughly 2,300, give or take, we can take it out of contingency. This way we'll take care of all the expenses that we have on the festival space by the end of this year.
Yeah, and Kevin, you should have that final number in time for finance, I would think.
Oh, absolutely. I'll have it ahead of finance.
So I need a motion to
Mr.
move.
Molino, I'll make that motion that we take that money out of contingency.
Okay.
I'll second that, Gene. I would just like to say, Gene, you said 2,300.
23,000.
I just want to just correct.
Everybody knows it's 23,000.
I don't want any surprises.
No, don't worry about it. All right, so we got a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Moved, thank you. Kevin, anything else you want to talk about that tiki wall, we've been working on that for a year.
Yeah, we're still working on it. I don't have necessarily an update for you. The fund for Lake George, as well as the Lake George Association, we're going out during the last rain event to kind of see where the water's running. I will say, and I know Dennis, we have talked about this as well, with the work that was done along Route 9, that really doesn't put any more water into his parking lot. The curve in front of that building, we watched the last rainstorm, the water run right down Route 9, never even kind of got into his property. Now, if it's a severe storm with say a 500-year storm, that water would probably go into there. We kind of mapped out all the catch basins, detention basins that he has within the lot. There's a couple of those catch basins that don't even take water. Water migrates somewhere else because there's an elevation change that the water just doesn't even get to the catch basins. And in the back, they noticed that there's a catch basin in the back of the tiki area that has it seems to be clogged, filled with material. We don't know where it outlets to. That's one of the things that we're trying to locate. But the last I told you, and the same thing I'll tell you now, they're coming up with an estimate to provide to the owners of the tiki and saying this is the cost associated with stopping the drainage from coming in, putting that back pressure on our wall to collapse our wall on that property. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Kevin. Any other comments from the committee before I open to the privilege to the floor, public? All right. Do we have any comment?
No comments from the public, Chairman Merlino.
Thank you, sir. All right, without further, anybody else have anything, motion to adjourn? Mr. McGowan, who seconded that? Ms. Frazier, thank you, we're adjourned.
Happy Thanksgiving, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin.